Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's stream. Today, I'm going to follow up. If you'll notice, the live stream still says citizens and residents, the pros and the cons. I'm going to wait a little bit for everybody to get in the room, but I wanted to do a little bit of a follow-up today from my last live stream. It's basically, if you look at the background and everything else, it's the same. And I'd like to, let's say hello to some people that's already shouted out. Cindy K, welcome. Profe. Miles, how are you doing? Are you in, thanks for dropping by, Miles. Are you in San Miguel or are you back in Arizona? Bonnie, welcome. Wilfredo, welcome too. The reason why I want to do this follow-up is I went over Mexican citizenship last week. And what are the advantages, what are the pros, and what are the cons? One of the things that I was talking about, and I talked about being able to buy property on the beach, and I also talked about having a Mexican passport. Also, you can travel to more places. One of the things that I mentioned is that it's very common practice for individuals to actually use their U.S. citizenship when they're coming into Mexico in order to basically bring their vehicles in. So basically what I was saying is that a lot of Mexican citizens, what they do, I live here close to the border, it's very common practice. And I was just noticing my chat's not working. My chat widget's not working. So pardon me if it's not working, but you guys can see each other on the chat. But one of the things that I had mentioned is that what individuals do with dual citizenship is that they come into Mexico with their dual citizenship, but they use their U.S. passport. They get a 180-day FMM or 7-day FMM, however long it is, and they get a temporary import permit based on their FMM. After I did that live stream, somebody in my Facebook group brought that to my attention. The reason why I actually brought this up is because someone brought to my attention that, hey, you may be wrong. The reason why I mentioned that about people using their U.S. citizenship is because it's very common practice. And I fell into something that I always tell people not to fall into. We all speak from our experience, and what I was doing is speaking from my experience and not speaking from researching into the topic. I just assumed that it was legal because everybody does that. And I see that a lot of people in Facebook groups say, well, I do it all the time. This law, it doesn't apply to, they never enforce it on me, so it must be legal, or they never enforce the law, or another YouTuber says, laws here are just suggestions. Well, actually, there's a lot of truth to a lot of things. Sometimes laws aren't enforced, and sometimes laws are loosely enforced. Sometimes we all get into this mode that just because everybody's doing it, it's okay. And I actually fell into that mode. Believe it or not, I did. And one of the things that the individual brought to my attention is that if you hold dual nationality, and it actually made sense, and I had to go ahead and research it, but when you have dual nationality in Mexico, although Mexico recognizes, and I did mention this in my live stream, that although Mexico recognizes dual nationality as of 1998, actually it was not until 1998 that they actually recognized dual nationality. When you are in Mexico, for example, you get arrested, you don't get consular protection because Mexico sees you as a Mexican citizen first. Actually, they disregard your second citizenship. Really, to be honest with you, the only thing that really Mexico does is they just recognize now that you are a citizen of another country. But you are not afforded the same diplomatic rights as a citizen of another country because Mexico considers you Mexican first. Well, the correction that this individual made was, it's illegal to come into Mexico on a U.S. passport if you're a dual citizen. And he pointed out the ley de nacionalidad. I actually did a video. I released it yesterday, and I actually explained why. But he brought these points to my attention. I said, you know what? It makes sense. Let me research this and let me get it out, because if I'm wrong, we need to correct this. So I did correct it in a video. But what I wanted to do is give you a little bit of a background so that I can actually explain what I explained in my video. And I'm going to switch over here. And as you can see, this is Article 30 of the Mexican Constitution. Article 30 basically explains in the Mexican Constitution how Mexico recognizes citizens. And as I said in my video, there's a citizen by birth right up here. That's Section A, and a citizen by naturalization. Okay, and if you remember my last live stream, I explained that if you had Mexican parents, you could go to the Mexican consulate with your birth certificate, with your proof of your Mexican parents, and you could get Mexican citizenship automatically because you were a citizen derived by birth. And then I went on to say that if you want to be naturalized, you can actually go through the naturalization process, and you can become a citizen by naturalization. And there's one process that takes 2 years. It says if you're married to a Mexican citizen, or you're actually a descendant of somebody from Mexico. That's like if your grandparents were from Mexico. And I also mentioned you have to take a cultural history test. And I also mentioned that you have to take a Spanish test. If you're above 60 or you're a minor, you don't have to take the cultural test, but you still have to take the Spanish test. And so that's basically the two types of citizenship. Now, there are some restrictions. If you get a citizenship by birth, there's two major things to remember by a citizen by birth. A citizen by birth, you're able to actually participate in politics, basically run for office. You also can't have your citizenship taken away. Okay. Now, a citizen by naturalization, they can revoke your citizenship. And there's a certain article here that says under what circumstances. And then we have the Ley de Nacionalidad, which I mentioned in my video, which is up here, that basically says that when you enter into the country of Mexico, the Ley de Nacionalidad, basically all it does is it's the law that governs these articles that I'm mentioning right now. But in the Ley de Nacionalidad, it says that you shall not enter into the country. Actually, to be honest with you, you shall not conduct any foreign business, Mexican business, with a foreign passport. In other words, if you buy a house, you can't pull out your U.S. passport. You have to do it as a Mexican. If you do any kind of legal process here in Mexico, you have to do it as a Mexican with your Mexican ID. You cannot use your U.S. passport. You cannot pull out your U.S. passport. If you fill out a document, a government document with your U.S. passport, then basically you can get in trouble. That's basically what the law says. So like I said, you can't enter the country on your U.S. passport. You have to enter the country as a Mexican citizen. So what is the consequences? Well, the Ley de Nacionalidad says that there's two consequences, because it depends if you're a Mexican by birth or a Mexican by naturalization. A Mexican by birth can never have their Mexican citizenship taken away. They can have their rights limited, but they cannot have it taken away. In other words, if you get sent to prison, you can have certain rights taken away, but you can't. It's kind of like in other countries, but you can't lose your citizenship. So if you violate any of these laws, for example, or any of these regulations, for example, using your U.S. passport, like I said, the fine can be anywhere from 300 to 500 times the minimum wage, which I believe I said it was between $35 and $5,000 and something dollars, $5,400. So basically, that's what can happen to a Mexican citizen. You're subject to a fine. Now, what they say about a naturalized citizen is that you can have your citizenship revoked as per Article 37 of the Mexican Constitution. Now, I want to go over Article 37, not just because of the car thing or the tip thing or coming in on a U.S. passport, but there are some actual requirements to maintain your citizenship. So I think it's very important to go over this, because when I started researching, I started seeing a little bit more than what I was under the understanding. Mexican nationality, like I said in Article 37, you can never have this actually that I'm pulling up here. I forgot to mention, it's the actual Mexican Constitution. It's interpreted by the Universidad Nacionalidad de Autónoma, no, Universidad Autónoma Nacional de UNAM is what I know it as. But this is the university that I use for that does legal studies. It's an actual interpretation of the Mexican Constitution into English. I'm going to leave a link in my live video. Now, this Article 37 is what they're talking about. For example, Mexican nationality by naturalization can be revoked in the following cases. If the person voluntarily acquires a foreign nationality, pretends to be a foreign citizen, in other words, pretending to be a foreign citizen, or when subscribing any public document, uses a foreign passport or accepts or uses nobility titles. So this is basically the part that I said that if you go and you get your tip, or you get a tourist permit, or you get an FMM, this is the part where you can have your actual Mexican citizenship revoked. In the case of a Mexican by birth, which is, in other words, you derived it from your parents, or you were born in Mexico, then you can be subject to a fine. Now, the other thing is, and also this is a part that I was saying, don't fill out any other government documents. Now, also, if a person lives abroad for more than 5 years in a row, so that means if you're a Mexican citizen and you return to your home country and you're outside the country for more than 5 years in a row, you can actually have your citizenship revoked. Okay, so I think that's very important that we realize that. The other thing is there are some limitations to Mexican citizenship that if you are naturalized, actually, Brett, I don't know if he's here tonight, but Brett brought this to my attention. Brett actually brought this to my attention, Brett Jones. But in Article 33, if it says that all foreigners may, you have the same rights as in determined by Article 30, and you're entitled to human rights, but foreigners may not in any way participate in political affairs of the country. Okay, so in other words, you can't march. I know that a lot of expats like to take up causes, and a lot of expats say, oh, there's going to be a march for women's rights. Whatever. You cannot participate in those marches. As a matter of fact, you cannot, as a resident, participate in. Now, as a naturalized citizen, you can participate in certain activities, but you cannot run for office. You can't be the mayor. You can't be the president. But this Article 33 is very important because I know that a lot of people like to get involved. As a matter of fact, there's even a YouTuber that marches along I guess he claims to be a sovereign citizen. He was going through toll booths. He runs the toll booths because he says it's against the Constitution. He's even gone and marched with the people because there's a big issue here with the toll booths. There's a group of people who don't think it's fair to be charged. And he even actually marches with them. And actually, he's violating the law by doing this, by going out and marching with them, by going out and protesting with them. He's actually violating the law. And I don't think a lot of people understand that, okay? And a lot of people try to get involved in politics. And yes, you might have a very, you might be passionate about something, but we need to understand and we need to realize that you cannot participate in any kind of political activity. And we're talking about organized political activity, even if it's a march, even if it's you're just one of the people that is representing, you cannot do that. I want to make that very, you can have your residency revoked. Now, your citizenship is a different story, but not your residency, you can't have it revoked. I know this is about citizenship versus residence. And so I wanted to bring this up as far as residency. And actually, Brett was the one that says maybe I should bring that up. So that's what I wanted to do tonight is I wanted to correct my error in the fact that I didn't even realize this. Someone brought it to my attention. Number one, I'd love to thank the community because that's what our community is all about. Our community is all about helping each other out. I don't have all the answers. I've even said it many times. I'm not an expert. I don't claim to be an expert. And we want to bring the most accurate information to you. If I'm wrong, and I need to correct this error, and especially this error. Now, one thing that we need to really, the reason why I even wanted to come onto a live stream again tonight, and reiterate this instead of just releasing this video, is because I wanted to stress the point about, we always talk about, for example, I've talked about doing border runs, going every 6 months, every 180 days to the border. It's technically not legal, even though people say it is. It technically isn't. Yes, it's legal once you get the permission. It's kind of a technicality. It's the immigration officer that decides whether you're living here or not. So once he decides you're not living here, even though you are, it's legal, kind of, sort of. But in the Mexican law, it's not legal technically, okay? But we often say, well, everybody does it. Everybody does it. And Mexico doesn't enforce the laws. As a matter of fact, I was just doing my follow-up investigation on Tangerine Travels. I had a commenter. And actually, you won't see the comment because he deleted it right away. But he did this long thing about how he's lived in Mexico before on a tourist FMM. He even somehow got a right to vote. He was able to vote. He was able to open up a Mexican bank account. He was able to do all of this stuff. And that in Mexico, they don't really enforce the laws and all sorts of stuff. And then the next thing I know, I get a comment that says, hey, you deleted my comment. What are you hiding? And then I said, well, I'm not hiding anything. I just got home. I'll repost it for you and I'll answer your question. But the point is this individual is trying to say, well, Mexico doesn't really enforce this stuff. And actually, this is what got a lot of people in trouble when the immigration started cracking down. There was a couple of YouTubers that were saying, don't worry, you can live here illegally. Mexico doesn't care. The problem that we have with all of this stuff is that, yes, I even said it in my video, there's a difference between enforcement. Mexico has been very lax in their enforcement of immigration laws in the past. And I'm not going to say that they haven't, but the problem is that those laws are in place. So if you become the victim of one of those laws, the consequences can be pretty grave. For example, in this case, you can actually lose your citizenship. Not only will you lose your citizenship, you can't live in Mexico because you don't even have residency anymore. So now this is common practice. Mexicans do it all the time. They come in, dual nationals do it all the time. They come in, they give their, and then people say, well, how are they going to find out? I don't know. Probably they don't have the computer systems hooked together to know if a person's a Mexican citizen. Maybe they do with naturalization. But what I'm trying to say is, well, how are they going to know? I just give them a U.S. passport. Well, that's true. How are they to know? But the problem is if someone finds out or someone just decides, and I've had this happen to me before, some immigration officer decides, I'm going to check the computer just because I feel like checking the computer today. And he decides, oh, wait, you're a Mexican citizen. You're not supposed to be doing this. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, you're losing your citizenship. You're being set up for revocation. Or not only you're being set up for revocation, but you're also being set up for a fine if you're Mexican by birth. And you're going, but I've done this 50 times. What's wrong now? Well, guess what? You got caught. This is what happened during the immigration problem situation. People were running to the border every 180 days. I know one individual during COVID that got stuck in Belize when they wouldn't let him back in. And I've used this example 20 million times. And the thing about it is, you know what? Although that 1,000 people come in every 180 days, or millions of people, or thousands and hundreds and thousands come in every 180 days, that one person, I hate to say it, but there's a saying, it sucks to be you. And that's what I'm trying to bring across. You guys need to know the consequences of what it is, and what are the consequences of what you do. Because when you do come, you're the one that gets actually the law enforced on, oh, okay, I'm not surprised. What happens in a lot of these cases, especially in the immigration realm, people were like, wait a second, how can you do this? This is legal. How can you do this? It's okay. How can you do this? Because I've been doing it I did it for 15 years. There was some people that were doing it for 15 years. And the next thing they know, they got 7 days to get their stuff and get out of the country. So we can't assume anything, okay? That's my point in this whole live stream. You can't assume that everything's fine. And one of the most dangerous things that you can say is that Mexican laws are just suggestions. They're not suggestions. They're the law. And whether they're enforced or whether they're not enforced, that's beside the point. You need to know the law so that if it is enforced. And one of the things that I always joke around, because I not even joke around, but I always say Mexican bureaucracy here, when I was applying for my residency, we had to go back to the INM office like 15 times because every single time they required a different form, a new form, an extra form. And we didn't really know. We ended up hiring a facilitator, but that's an example of how they were holding us to every single form that we had to fill out. And then I talked to other people and it's like, no, I didn't have to hand in that form. I didn't have to get that form. I never had. I also used the example of I have a niece here. They purchased a car and the car was plated in Querétaro. And my brother-in-law was trying to have the plates changed to Nuevo León. And I'm not kidding you. They had to take 5 or 6 trips back to the office until someone they were following the law. The law says you have to check to make sure it's not stolen here. And then they found out it was originally sold somewhere else. Then they had to check. So they were following the law. And then at the very end, somebody came in and said, oh, don't worry, I'll help you. And they helped them and they changed the plates. So you need to understand that there are times in this bureaucracy that they will. And I even say, when they want to enforce the law, literally, they will go overboard and enforce the law letter for letter, word for word. And I've seen it. So it doesn't matter if they didn't enforce the law 50 million times before. The minute that they start enforcing the law or enforcing a regulation, trust me, they enforce it like there's no tomorrow. So these are the things that we need to understand, and these are the things that we need to look at. And it's not that I'm trying to tell you don't do this, because like I said, it's common practice, but just know what you're getting yourself into. That's what's important, is knowing what you get yourself into. So that's what I wanted to stress with this. And this is a perfect example. And I think I just wanted to bring this up in the live stream, and I'm just going to keep it at this. So what I'm going to do, since we're already 30 minutes, is I'm going to go ahead and answer your questions. And Miles, oh, by the way, I might be in San Miguel in June. So if you're still there, just to let you know, I might be in San Miguel in June. Wilfredo, I'll be in Oaxaca and Cancun in a month or so. And Angie, clarification. Mexican by birth includes a citizen as a descendant. Okay, I'm not sure what you're asking there, Angie, because Miles, I'll actually definitely see you there in June if I'm able to make it there in June. Not sure, maybe towards the end of June, because we still have to move into the new house. Angie, as far as the clarification, when you say descendant, there's 2 types of descendant. The first one is by birth, like I said. you were either born or one of your parents were born. In other words, you can be born, like let's say one of your parents is a Mexican citizen and you were born in the United States. You're automatically a citizen by birth, even though you were born in the United States. So you're a descendant of your mother or father. So that's Mexican by birth. All right. Now, let's say, and this happens a lot. This actually happened to my oldest son. For example, my oldest son, his grandparents were his grandparents came from Mexico. They migrated from Mexico, and his mom was born here in the United States, but his mom never took care of her paperwork. She never claimed her Mexican citizenship. So my son, since his grandfather is a Mexican citizen, was a Mexican citizen, then my son can claim Mexican citizenship as a descendant. Now, that is a different process because you're not considered a Mexican by birth. You will still have to go, a Mexican citizen as a descendant has to go through the naturalization process. And that's the process where you have to be a lawful resident for 2 years. If you remember from my last live stream. So that's an example of an exact, like dual citizenship via abuela. Yes, Angie, that would be a descendant, and you would have to go through the. Now, here's the thing: if your parents did fix their citizenship, then you would get your citizenship through your parents. And if one of your parents has citizenship, then you can, or fix their citizenship from your grandparents, then they can you can get it from that would make you a citizen by birth. But if either one of your parents fixed it up, then you would have to go through the naturalization process. So, any other questions? Like I said, I always open it up at the very end for anything about Mexico, or anything about citizenship that you want to know. Like I said, a lot of people want to get citizenship because of owning property on the beach, but there are disadvantages to it. And actually, really, to be honest with you, I think the only way of if you really think about it, the only advantage is now that I'm knowing that you can get it revoked for getting a tip. There's no other advantage other than owning real estate on the beach. Oh, and Angie, I have an appointment at Dallas on Wednesday to apply for Mexican passport. I think we discussed that before. And Miles, I would add that taking second subsequent citizenship needs to consider that needs to consider that the one you already have may not allow taking other citizenship. That is a truth. Singapore, for example, are strict on that. Actually, believe it or not, to be honest with you, Miles, the United States, technically, even though they, for example, when you naturalize, most Mexicans have to renounce their Mexican citizenship. But since you can't, Singapore is actually, even the United States, believe it or not, the United States is one of those countries. The only thing is the United States has always been kind of lenient on that. And there are several countries that if you do take a second citizenship, you're automatically renouncing. And here's an actual interesting point, historical point. Did you know that Mexicans, once they naturalized, actually what Miles is bringing up until 1998, a Mexican citizen who naturalized, because when you naturalize, you sign you renounce your Mexican citizenship, you actually lost your citizenship in Mexico up until 1998. In March of 1998, that changed. As a matter of fact, we even have a friend that previous to 1998 got naturalized, lost her citizenship, and a lot of those people that lost their citizenship previous to 1998, that got naturalized previous to 1988, 98 still have to go back to the government of Mexico and reclaim the citizenship after that law was passed. So that's another thing. And the other important thing I think to note on Miles' point is also remember a lot of people do this for tax liability reasons. They'll get a second passport or a third passport for tax liability reasons. But remember, when you do naturalize as a Mexican citizen, you are more under the microscope for paying Mexican taxes, or you also have to look at the tax consequences of that country. Yeah, voting is another advantage, Brett. And you can participate in those local marches because you're a Mexican citizen if you really want to vote. And you also want to participate in political activities. Now, you cannot hold office. That's the one thing. You can't hold public office. You have to be a citizen by birth. If I was born in a Latin, will I qualify for the fast track to 2 years of naturalization in Mexico? Yes, Profe, you will. If you were born somewhere in Latin America or the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal, you would qualify for the 2-year track. Brett, I didn't know this. If you renounce your U.S. citizenship, it will cost $2,350. That is crazy. Actually, I have read articles about individuals who renounce their U.S. citizenship. And actually, when you naturalize, you renounce all other citizenships with Mexico. But even though you renounce your U.S. citizenship on a piece of paper in Mexico, I actually dealt with this before. The U.S. is very lenient. They basically don't enforce it. And so they've never really enforced it, even though you have to actually go to an embassy and turn in your passport. The only thing I've heard of is people turning in their passport. And if you don't qualify for temporary residency, dual citizenship is the next best way, I think. Yes, actually, I'm not putting down dual citizenship here. Many people are dual citizens by birth. It's the easiest way to get. Basically, you don't need residency. You're a Mexican citizen. You have a Mexican passport. Like I said, you can even travel to Cuba on your Mexican passport. The thing that I need to make you aware of, though, is that if you're here, if you're a dual citizenship, you need to know the limitation. If you're a dual citizen, you need to know the limitations. You need to do everything as a Mexican citizen here. If you buy a piece of property, you're going to do it as a Mexican citizen. You're not going to do it. You're not going to pull out your U.S. passport. The only thing you'll ever pull out your U.S. passport for is to go back to the United States when you enter in the United States. And Wilfredo, you're right. Mexico, like the U.S., taxes the income worldwide. Yes, but one thing that's different though is that depending on what country, Mexico has tax treaties with different countries. The U.S. is one of them. And so if you make money here or if you make money there in Mexico, and here's the thing, though, I haven't really checked into it, but in the United States, you still have to report foreign income, even if you don't have to pay. Like, for example, if you make foreign income here in Mexico, you pay the taxes here, and up to a certain amount, you get a tax credit in the United States. But the one thing you need to understand is that you still have to report the income to the IRS. Even if you don't have to pay taxes, you still have to report it. Same thing with your foreign bank account reports, which I've done a video on. You need to report that you have a foreign bank account. Okay. Now, I don't know what the reporting requirements are in Mexico, but getting a Mexican citizenship may open you. Now they're making everybody get an RFC, which is a Registro Federal. It's your Mexican tax ID number. Now, I don't know if they tax worldwide income. They may have reporting requirements just like the United States, even though you pay taxes in the United States. And vice versa, up to a certain amount, you don't have to pay them here because you pay it somewhere else. But they may have recording requirements. And Miles, additionally, if you have more than $2 million in assets in the USA, there is there's an exit tax as well for on renunciation. Thanks on that one, Miles. Like I said, the only thing I've heard about for tax purposes, a lot of people have renounced for tax purposes, as I mentioned in the last video. But that's just in articles that I've actually read. I'm not very familiar. I just know that in the articles it always mentions that there's a lot of Americans that are showing up to embassies and handing in their passport. But thank you for expounding on that, Miles. Is ivermectin available over the counter in Mexico? I'm not sure what type. There's a lot of medication available over the counter in Mexico. Certain medications are actually controlled. For example, I take medication for cholesterol. That's not controlled. You can go buy it over the counter. I don't know what ivermectin is. With the TIN, I'm thinking it's an antibiotic. Or an antiviral medication. Usually when it's it ends in IN. It's usually a antibiotic. If it's an antibiotic, those are controlled in Mexico. Mexico, many years ago, had a lot of issues with antibiotics. Actually, at one point, the population was actually immune to antibiotics. So now antibiotics are actually controlled substances here. You need a prescription. Also, things like clonazepam, Xanax, which is clonazepam is part of the Xanax family. Xanax, opiate type drugs, those are controlled here in Mexico. You have to have a prescription. They'll actually take your ID. They actually put it down. They actually put it in the computer that you bought it. So it's controlled like some of the substances in the United States. But there's a lot of things that are not controlled. You can get regular medications, certain medications, 90% of them, I would say good 90% are not controlled. Antibiotics is controlled. Opiates are controlled. And stuff like the, I guess, I don't know what benzopoint, I forgot how, I can't even pronounce it. But that family of drugs is actually, it's an addictive drug, but it's also controlled in the United States. Those are controlled in Mexico. Now, Mexico has this unique thing that they did. Not Mexico, but the pharmacies have this unique thing that they did, is that in order to get around that, a lot of pharmacies have a doctor that like literally has their office actually as part of the pharmacy, and you go next door to the doctor and you tell them what you need, and they write the prescription. In some cases, the doctor, if they feel that you don't need it, they won't give it to you. But most of the time, that's the way they get around needing a prescription. But those that are actually controlled in Mexico, those substances that are actually controlled in Mexico, I will tell you that they're very well controlled. I mean, they literally, as a matter of fact, there's some, I think one time when I got my medication for, I think it was an antibiotic, I went to the pharmacy, and I had my residency card, and they didn't know what to do because they expected a Mexican citizen, like an INA card. And then my wife, she pulled out her Mexican ID and was able to purchase it. And then later on, I asked, like, well, but I'm a resident here. I live here. How come? And it was like, no, the girl didn't know what she was doing. She just didn't know what number to put in the computer. But there's a number on your residency card that they actually put in the computer whenever you buy antibiotics or any kind of controlled substance. Anything, and actually, you know what? I'm gonna look up what if it's an antibiotic. I don't know. Let me look up here. Oh, it's an antiparasitic. Okay. Yeah. You know what? I don't think if I'm not looking, I'm looking at it here. It's an anti-parasitic drug that shouldn't be controlled. So that it should be available over the counter. There's several anti-parasitic medications that people take every year here, just so they won't get parasites. It's not as common as it used to be in Mexico. There used to be an old saying, and I hate to say this. It may sound derogatory, but they always say, "Don't drink the water in Mexico." That comes from an old days where people, where the water in certain parts of Mexico didn't go through a process like it does nowadays, and a lot of people would get parasites. Actually, amoeba was one of the common ones. So there was this "don't drink the water." That's where they get this joke about "don't drink the water." And I think if I'm not mistaken, the joke was aimed towards Mexico when it first came out. Now it's become a very common joke. Don't drink the water when you go to this place. But now Mexico, most of the water goes through water treatment plants. Any place you go through, it goes through a water treatment plant. Probably years ago, it didn't go through a water treatment plant. And there's people that to this day, they still take antiparasitics and they swear by it, that we need to take it every year just to make sure that we don't get anything. But I've been here 5 years and never gotten a parasitic infection. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to leave it open for the next 2 minutes here, or 3 minutes. If nobody has any other questions, I'm going to call it a day for today's live stream. Thank you guys for showing up. And like I said, just remember, when you're doing your research, don't forget to always verify the information. A lot of us, just like I said, even I was speaking from experience. And what happened? I assumed that it was okay because everybody does it. And that's not necessarily the case. Make sure you do your research. Make sure you know the consequences. And make sure you know the laws. Make sure you know what you're up against. And you can make when you make a decision, you make an educated decision. That's what's important. Because if the consequences isn't that bad, or you're willing to take the consequences, I even use this as an example. Somebody in my Facebook group says, I've been running to the border every 180 days. I've never had a problem. And I said, well, better have a backup plan, because that day may come, or they may say, too bad, so sad. And she said, well, I can always go back to New York. I said, oh, that's great. You have a backup plan. So, you already know what the consequences can be. But that way, if you're educated, you know what you're facing, then you can make a backup plan. Then you can know what you're facing, so that if something like this happens, you have a place to go. You don't want to end up like that poor soul in Belize that couldn't get back in the country and couldn't go back to Canada because his country was locked down. This guy literally got stuck in the middle of nowhere because he was taking people's word for it that he could run to the border. And he even went to Guatemala, and they didn't let him in through Guatemala. What he did, what he said, I don't know. Because I would have sworn he should have been able to get in through Guatemala, but he didn't. And he was stuck in Guatemala. Eventually, from Belize, went to Guatemala, and he was stuck in Guatemala, couldn't go to his home country, and couldn't get into Mexico. And like I said, it really stinks to be you. And the problem is, if I'm giving you advice, anybody else is giving you advice, you know what? I'm not the one that has to pay the consequences. You are in the end. And just know the consequences. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for your time. And my new saying, instead of see you soon, is stay informed. And until next time, see you soon.